Unsealed Spellbook is probably the most complex rune in the game. This is because of its inherent flexible nature to be able to react to multiple situations, while also giving the user many ways to change up how they play depending on the spell they change to. For those that don't know, the Unsealed Spellbook rune lets you swap to a different summoner spell starting at 6 minutes with an initial cooldown of 300 seconds. This cooldown decreases by 25 seconds each time you swap to a unique summoner spell, down to a cap of 150 seconds after 6 swaps. You must also swap to 3 different spells before you can swap to one you've already used. So for example, if you swap to heal on the first swap, you won't be able to swap to heal again until your 5th swap. Additionally, you can't swap until you wait 5 seconds out of combat, so you won't be able to change spells in the middle of taking or dealing damage. I'll be using Bard as my main method of transportation for this video, but if you've been watching my channel, you would know that I go this rune on basically every champion I play that can Hex Flash and breathe, so the tips I give will be universal for other champions as well. Let's get into it. Before we get into the more specific cases of when and what to swap, the main question that you have will probably be, when should I even go Unsealed Spellbook? And the answer is, all the time, because reading is good for you. I can get away with going Spellbook on most supports since, you know, it's a support, but I wouldn't recommend it for other lanes or roles just because you're going to need your main rune page to even survive most matchups. You also have to know that going Spellbook requires you to actually think about the game, because maximizing the potential of the rune means that you'll be changed to something different every time depending on the situation, so you need at least some level of macro or forward thinking to use it properly. Whenever someone asks me if they should start playing Spellbook Bard, I always tell them that they should learn how to play Bard first and then learn Spellbook Bard afterwards, because those two things are entirely different. It's like learning how to drive a car. When you learn how to play Bard or drive a car, you should take it slow and focus on things like driving straight, turning corners, refueling your car with gas, the usual, until you can do those things so naturally that you can focus on something else. But if you skip the basics and immediately go into a game with Spellbook Bard, you're basically trying to learn how to drift blindfolded with one hand, and now you're going to crash since there's way too many things to think about all at once. If you decide to ignore my warnings because you're just that good and logic does not apply to you, then here's the current rune page I go. You go Spellbook because, yeah, Hex Flash is absolutely amazing if you know how to avoid the enemy's vision through Fog of War, since it lets you get into very sneaky spots without having to spend your portal in a one-way trip. It's also really good to have as a backup for Baron steals or just jumping over walls in general if your main flash is down. Now that Biscuits restore HP instead of mana, it's the only rune that's even semi-useful in this entire row for Bard. And finally, I go Cosmic Insight for obvious reasons. I go Cheap Shot for a little more damage, or Zombie Ward if I'm feeling spicy, and Ultimate Hunter since I like ulting a lot. These are just the runes for my specific playstyle, so you can obviously change them up if you hate me. I go every active support I am in the game to maximize my Cosmic Insight rune. There's also some random tank build that shows up from time to time on Bard, but I always eventually default back to the standard support build because the economy is pretty bad right now, and I can't afford to buy these expensive tank items anymore. I go Fasting at Night because I like jumping over walls and setting things on fire. For every champion that goes Spellbook, you want to choose your starting spells based on what you think you'll be using the most, since you'll only be using a swap spell once or maybe twice for most games due to the 3 swap lockup period, while you'll be able to use your main spell constantly the entire game. You can go Exhaust or Heal on Bard if you're an absolute coward, and going things like Smite or Teleport sound pretty bad. I actually talked about when I use every spell in my Bard Guide But Meme video, but after using this rune page for years and developing my playstyle even more, I found that the best way to maximize Spellbook's full potential is through the act of doubling down and sending it. Theory can only get you so far in a real game, so when the rune unlocks itself at 6 minutes, I want you to take a long 3 seconds to think about the best spell you can swap to given your current situation, then swap to it, then do everything in your power to use that spell immediately for a purpose. If you think you're about to have a team fight, swap to Heal or Exhaust, and sprint at your enemies using the speeder from Heal, or to slap the Exhaust onto them right away. If you think your teammate's gonna get beat up topside, swap to TP, then either use it ASAP to save them, or run top with your traffic cone legs, farm honors from being there in time, then teleport bot immediately before your ADC inevitably gets dived. Just have some kind of logic for why you swap to something instead of randomly choosing something like Clarity when you and your team have full mana. The worst thing you can do is swap to a spell, then proceed to never use it until you replace it with another spell in the next swap, because then now you've been basically runeless for 11 minutes instead of just 6. It's why I'm putting such heavy emphasis on just doing something with it right away, or else there's no reason to have even gone this rune page. Case in point, if you watch the most recent Worlds, in Game 5 of Fight Quest vs Gen G, Inspired went Fiddlesticks jungle with Spellbook, which got me super excited to see how a professional player would be able to pirate the rune. After going through the entire game, however, here are the exact timings for when he swapped, and used the spells he swapped to. The fact that going literally any other rune page would have at least passively helped the entire game makes it even worse, and is why I had to stress how bad Spellbook can grief you if you're not using it properly, or you're not given the situation to use it properly. This leads me to the next danger of going Spellbook, which is what I call the concept of dead spells. There are only 2 dead spells in the list, which are Ignite and Exhaust. This basically means that if you swap to one of these 2 spells, you have no way of getting rid of them until either your next swap or until you get within range of an enemy, but there are going to be some games where you just straight up can't get near your enemy without dying, which leads to one of your summoner spell slots being essentially dead and unusable. It's why I never replace my flash shot with exhaust unless I know 100% sure I'm going to be immediately sprinting or porting into my enemy to be in range to use it, since if I don't play that way, then I'll be stuck with the exhaust forever as a reminder of my failure. Going back to the FlyQuest vs Gen G game, somehow the first two spells Fizz swapped to were 1 Ignite, which actually prevented him from using his smite the entire game until he finally got rid of it, and 2 Exhaust, which he decided to put onto his flash. It didn't matter much since his flash was on cooldown, but it's still a pretty bad choice considering it could have locked him out for the rest of the game. With that out of the way, let's talk about the very specific interactions that come with playing Spellbook that I still to this day can't tell if some are intentional game design or if it's a straight up bug. Let's say you start the game with Flash and Ignite. At 5 minutes, you use your Ignite on an enemy, and at 6 minutes, when you can use Spellbook, you change your Ignite that's currently on cooldown to Heal. The rune page is designed so that if your Ignite comes off cooldown and you haven't used your new heal until then, the Ignite will not override the heal, but will be kept at a ready state so that after you finally use the swapped heal, your Ignite can be used immediately after a brief delay. Now this is good and all, except for when it comes to Hex Flash. If you go to the Hex Flash rune, after you use your regular flash, the spell will automatically turn into Hex Flash until the original flash comes back off cooldown. But if you use Flash, then it turns to Hex Flash, and you swap the Hex Flash to another spell, instead of like the previous scenario where the spell came back from cooldown and was just kept at a ready state, the original flash would overwrite whatever spell you had in the slot, which in a lot of situations actually griefs you. On the wiki, this exact interaction is listed as a bug, but to my knowledge, this bug has been in the game for a super long time, so I don't know, man. Like, I'm pretty sure it's just a feature by this point. Just be careful, since there are times when I swap to a spell, then lost it basically immediately since my Hex Flash turned back into regular flash on cooldown. Another weird spell interaction I want to talk about is Smite. The intended method was that if your first swap at 6 minutes was Smite, it would deal 600 damage. If your second swap was Smite, it would deal 900 damage. And if your third swap and after was Smite, it would deal 1200 damage. This was to roughly mirror the jungler item breakpoints of 20 treats and 40 treats, which increases their smite damage from 600 to 900 to 1200. So there are some rare times when you can actually have a 900 damage smite on the second swap, and if the enemy jungler didn't reach under the 20 treat breakpoint by then, you would get basically a free dragon steal with an extra 300 damage confirmed. Do keep in mind that this usually doesn't happen in most games, since unless the enemy jungler got counter goes hard or perma ganked without farming, they easily have 900 smite damage before you can swap for a second time. There was also a time where the first smite swap did 0 damage and the second swap did 1200 damage, which is super overpowered for obvious reasons, but that bug has been fixed, so I'll just mention it here in case a new patch messes up the rune again. Keep in mind as well that the numbers you see when you hover over the smite and the number above your HUD bar are sometimes straight up wrong. Like here, it says my smite does only 600 damage when it's clearly the third swap and did 1200 damage to the monster. So you just have to keep a rough idea of how many times you swap by then, which should be pretty simple. One final thing about smite is that while every other spell has a 5-second cooldown time from when you swap to it versus when you can use it, weirdly enough, you can swap to and use smite without any delay as long as you weren't in combat. Here are some extra tips if after everything I just talked about, you still want to go to this rune page. If I think I'm about to go into a team fight, I usually swap to heal or go so that I can start the fight with essentially 3 summoner spells. For example, if I go into the fight with my flash and ignite up, I would change one of them to ghost and use it immediately since Bardio likes cardio, so that I enter the fight with increased movement speed, while also still being able to use my other spells. I wouldn't wait to use it since that would lock me out of using whatever spell I swapped it for, so it's better to just get an early usage for it than play around that. I usually choose my first and second swaps pretty fast to start the cooldown rotation, but I decide to sit and wait starting from the third or fourth swap, since that's when my smite does 1200 damage and is also the time frame when Baron spawns. If I think the game's even and has a high chance to go into late game, I swap the smite immediately and play in a way so that if my jungler dies, I can act as a backup jungler to try to steal Baron or Dragon, and also increase the chances of doing it again later in the game when I can re-swap the smite. If it looks like the game's going to end before I'm able to swap 3 more spells however, I usually wait to see if I have to change the smite, or if a situation happens where Baron is taken by either team before I can look to steal, then I'll proceed normally with my swaps until the next Baron comes up or the game ends. The best tip I can give to increase your chances on objective steals is to try to get vision around the area as early as possible, and also know how to path in a way for the steal to even happen. If my jungler looks like he's going to get caught out and the fight looks too doomed to save them, I often just immediately book it to Baron to get vision everywhere before hiding in a weird spot the enemy won't expect. If you're able to perfectly time your ult to hit the enemy jungler as the Baron's HP goes down below 1200, then it's the easiest steal in the world since they can't smite in stasis, but in cases where that's not possible or if they dodge it, then it all comes down to how locked in you are before going for the 50-50. I try to mentally keep track of all my enemies' possible sources of damage, such as skill shots and auto attacks, before instinctively seeing when I would have to squeeze in my burst damage with Q and Spellbook Smite to be able to steal with the highest possibility. You can also do something like this, where you can actually do a drive-by Smite steal, but it's very inconsistent that I would much rather just go in on a one-way trip and try to steal it while dying. And that's basically it. Thank you to everyone once again for the 200k subscribers and for supporting me. I'll use this time to shamelessly plug my 2 other YouTube channels for Variety and Valorant content. I don't upload as often compared to my main League channel, but I try my best to post something whenever I have time. I usually stream everything on my Twitch channel since it's just more comfortable on that site even after Twitch Korea went down, but I still multi-stream on the 3 other YouTube channels depending on the content that day.